The player character of Johto, the one who millions of gamers controlled, and through that character were able to set off on a journey to experience the world of Pokemon. So the question here is, how do we create an in-game team for a character that can have an almost infinite amount of possible teams? Well, first, let's take a look at the one and only playable character that Game Freak actually did make a team for. Everyone's favorite mute, Red, who you end up facing atop Mount Silver as the final battle of the Johto games. He's revealed to use a Pikachu, all 3 of the Kanto starters, Snorlax, and an Espeon, who later gets replaced with a Lapras. Now, something that needs to be clarified before we go any further, we won't be factoring in spin-offs, the anime or manga adaptation. The characters from the anime and manga are completely different from the ones in the main games. Similar in design, but that's about it. To keep things simple and focused, we're just going to be looking at the main series of games today. One last issue we have to resolve is what version of the main series games is the Red we see based off, because depending on that answer, it'll shape the rest of the video. The fact that he has a Pikachu who level-wise is his strongest Pokemon, which normally is reserved for a trainer's ace or starter Pokemon, and is the only non-fully evolved Pokemon in his team, makes me lean towards Yellow version being the game that his team's pulled from. As in that game, Pikachu's your starter and can't evolve no matter what. The other thing is there's no way of getting all 3 starters in one playthrough of Red, Blue, or Green without trading or cheating, whereas in Yellow, you can actually get all 3 along with the rest of his team. Pikachu's the first Pokemon you can start out with. Would have been an Eevee actually, but Blue, being the piece of shit he is, pushes you out the way and takes it instead. You're actually gifted a Charmander pretty early on. After beating all the trainers on Nugget Bridge, you'll see this miserable fella who feels he can't raise his Charmander properly, and since he was gonna release it anyways, gives it to you instead. Then there's Bulbasaur, who you can get as a gift Pokemon in Cerulean City. There's a lady who just nursed it back to health, and if your Pikachu's a happy little camper, she'll give you the Bulbasaur. The last of the Kanto starters can be attained after beating the 3rd gym leader. It's really hard to miss. There'll be an Officer Jenny who will see that you have the Thunder Badge. Recognizing you as a capable trainer, she'll give you this hooligan in hopes that you can raise it to be more mature. Next up is Snorlax, the first and only Pokemon in Red's team so far that hasn't been a gift Pokemon. Rather, it appears in the overworld and serves as an obstacle. You have to face off against this Pokemon if you want to continue the game. Finally, there's Espeon, an unusual case as it's actually a Generation 2 Pokemon. However, you can receive its pre-evolution Eevee as a gift Pokemon in Celadon City by going through a back door of a building. Once you reach the top floor, there'll be a Pokeball containing an Eevee in it. Now, there's one more Pokemon that needs to be mentioned, and it's the Pokemon that would in later games replace Espeon, and that's Lapras. You get this as a gift Pokemon as well. When you're going off to face against Team Rocket, you're stopped by Blue, and he ends up challenging you to a battle. After giving him a proper beating, something he's probably getting pretty used to by this point, the scientist in the same room will give you a Lapras. Some contradictions though is actually less to do with Red but with Blue, as the team you face against in the sequel games is more so reminiscent to his Red, Blue, and Green team rather than his Yellow, so it's a bit of a mess even when just taking the main series into account. But for me, it makes the most sense to use Yellow as a template for basing Red's team. Plus, it's the latest version of the original Kanto games. If not, then Red's strongest Pokemon is a very rare encounter in Viridian Forest, and 2 of his starters are presumably traded Pokemon. Yellow simplifies things and creates a more cohesive template to map out what other main characters in-game teams would be. The trend here seems to be that the Pokemon are either gift or mandatory encounters, seemingly trying to eliminate as much RNG as possible. These are Pokemon that every player, if they explore around or just play through the game straight, have a 100% chance to encounter one way or another. There are some other options for Red's team following this logic, but we'll leave that for another discussion. So now let's use this framework to see what Ethan's team would be if he were to appear in a game. We're also going to take it one step further, however, and pick Pokemon that represent an aspect of the 2nd generation of games. Ethan not only represents the player's journey, but the Johto region and what those games brought to the table for the series as a whole. First up is a no-brainer. It's the Pokemon you start off with on your Johto journey. Although originally gifted by Professor Elm to have you help with his research, that all changed after he asked you to go on an errand for him. Unlike with Red and Pokemon Yellow, there's no actual way you can get all 3 Pokemon in any version of the games without trading or cheating. So So to make his team a bit more interesting, we'll be limiting ourselves to just one starter. The problem now is, which one? The best solution to make it so a starter isn't fixed to just one specific Pokemon is by having his be based off the starter the player character in that particular game picked, specifically the one that's super effective against yours. So for example, we know that the Sinnoh games take place around the same time as the Johto games, due to the intro where we see the news station talking about the events happening at the Lake of Rage. So we'll use these games as the example here. If you were to pick a Chimchar, Ethan will have a Feraligatr, Turtwig a Typhlosion, and if you pick Piplup, he'll end up with a Meganium. Doing it this way makes it so you could even include his rivals in the games and have him actually keep his starter. His second Pokemon makes just as much sense as him having a starter, and that's Togetic. You could have it be Togekiss and that'll be perfectly fine as I'll modernize his team, but I kinda see Togetic as a parallel to Red's Pikachu of sorts. Both incredibly adorable Pokemon that aren't optimal and need a stone to evolve. Its pre-evolution Togepi is actually very important. Not only was it introduced in the anime way before the Johto games, all the way back in episode 43 as an egg, it's pretty much the poster child of baby Pokemon and represents the introduction of breeding along with egg hatching, an element introduced in the second generation of games that added a new layer of depth to the series and changed the way most of us play these games, especially in the competitive scene. Not only that, but it's the reason why you go on your errand at the beginning of the game. Elm has you go check up on Mr. Pokemon and see what he has for him, which happens to be a mysterious egg that ends up being Togepi. This starts a chain of events that leads you to meeting the famous Professor Oak, getting a Pokédex, and somehow starting a journey across the region, collecting all 8 badges, and taking on the league. You eventually get Togepi while it's still just an egg from one of Professor Elm's assistants at the Violet City Pokemon Center, a one-of-a-kind Pokemon and most likely the first egg most trainers ever hatched. The third Pokemon is pretty much the Snorlax of the Johto games. You first encounter this unusual looking tree blocking your way to Ecruteak City. Only by beating the third gym leader and getting the squirt bottle, then sprinkling water on this strange looking tree, do you realize it's actually a Pokemon and get attacked. Like Togepi, it's a Pokemon you only encounter once, and just like Snorlax, is a mandatory encounter you have to have in order to continue your journey. So the first 3 were pretty easy to justify. They follow the precedent set up by Red's team pretty perfectly. But these next 3 are a bit more open to interpretation, but I tried my best to keep it in line with the framework that was set up earlier. Ethan's 4th team member is Umbreon. When you enter Ecruteak City's Pokemon Center, you'll be greeted by Bill, who will throw this whole blah blah that basically tries to justify how you can trade from the previous games, even though they take place 3 years in the past. He'll end up telling you that he's staying in Goldenrod City. Backtrack to his house and he'll end up giving you an Eevee. So why Umbreon out of the 5 possible evolutions? Well, for one, I think it'll be a cool rival for Red's Espeon, as well as what Umbreon itself represents. Generation 2 is one of the 2 generations out of the current 8 to introduce new types into the series. In this case, Dark and Steel, both designed to balance the previously overpowered Psychic type. The Dark type, more so than the Steel, is completely immune to Psychic type moves and super effective against them. The second reasoning being Umbreon is one of the new Pokemon introduced in this generation that takes evolutionary methods and expands on it, creating more interesting and unique methods of evolution. In Generation 1, there were only 3 a Pokemon can evolve through level up, elemental stones, or by trading. Generation 2 introduced the idea of happiness and how if a Pokemon reaches a certain level of trust, like Golbat for instance, will evolve into a Crobat upon leveling up. Adding to that, there's reaching a level of trust and leveling up at a certain point in time, like with Umbreon, taking advantage of another new feature introduced in Generation 2, the day and night cycle. There's also Tairo, who evolves based on stat distributions, others by trading with held items, and so forth. Later games would continue to build on this idea of creating new and interesting methods of evolution, with Generation 6 being the absolute craziest. 5th Pokemon time, and I feel like this one will be a bit more agreeable than the last, and that's Shiny Gyarados, a Pokemon that's famous in the community. Everyone knows about the red Gyarados found at the Lake of Rage. It's another mandatory encounter that you have no choice but to face against in order to progress through the story. It also represents a very important aspect of Pokemon introduced in Generation 2, shiny Pokemon. How many of you spent hours and hours of your life searching and collecting these alternate colored Pokemon? There's YouTubers who dedicate their entire channel to finding and collecting these Pokemon. While it isn't an obstacle Pokemon in the traditional sense, like Snorlax and Sudowoodo being actual physical obstructions, it is a gameplay obstacle as you need to face this Pokemon if you want to continue the game. The final Pokemon I'd have for Ethan's team is Dragonite. This one might be a bit confusing as some trainers might have missed this entirely, but it's actually a gift Pokemon you get from the head elder in Dragon's Den. Only in Crystal though. After beating Claire, she'll essentially throw a fit and tell you to go speak with the elder. There you'll be asked a series of questions, and when you're done, Claire will come, get all butthurt, and finally give you the badge. Now, if you go back to the elder, he'll give you a Dratini. If you answered all the questions correctly, however, the Dratini will actually know a special move in Extreme Speed, but you'll get a Dratini gifted to you regardless. It's actually quite fitting as it's a token of proof that you conquered all the gym leaders of Johto and is the champion's ace Pokemon. Kind of a perfect representation of your eventual succession of Lance as the champion of the Indigo Plateau. So there you have it, these 6 Pokemon I think Ethan should use if he were to appear in a game. But there were actually some other options that we could have used, so let's take a quick look at them. The Legendaries. Here's the thing with them, they were the next possible Pokemon to be considered for the team, but just barely missed out. If you think any of them should be on the team, I really can't argue too much against it. Johto is a region that's heavily rooted in tradition and folklore. While the place does have its cities and heavily populated areas, there's some parts of the region that feel almost mythical. Ho-Oh and Lugia are both Pokemon that are talked about as you play through the story, and in Crystal you encounter Suicune multiple times in the game. But the main reason these overworld encounters lost out to Pokemon like Sudowoodo and Shiny Gyarados is that you can completely ignore them. Yeah, none of them in any version of the original Gold, Silver, or Crystal are mandatory encounters. You're given pretty blatant hints as to where you should go. After thwarting Team Rocket's revival plan, the chairman gives you a key item and basically says, hey, you should probably go to this place. You might see some cool shit. But the thing is, you could just ignore him and take a ride at Mahogany Town, through the Ice Cave, battle the next gym leader, and take on the League, never once facing against any of them. Which is actually something I enjoyed about the first 2 generations of games. It's kinda cool. Next up is Tairo, and I'd have him evolve into Hitmontop. You get this Pokemon as a gift for beating the Karate King in Mount Mortar, and it fits the bill quite nicely. Not only is it a gift Pokemon, it's one of the Pokemon with a new evolutionary method, as well as the first Pokemon with a non-item based branching evolution path, where depending on its stat distribution at level 20, it'll evolve into a different Pokemon. He was the next viable option, but there's one big reason he missed out, and it involves another potential option we'll be discussing later. Next up is Electro. During a raid on Team Rocket's hideout in Mahogany Town, in order to stop the machines emitting the radio waves, you're forced into battling 3 Electrodes. These are Pokemon like Sudowoodo and Shiny Gyarados where you don't have a choice but to encounter them. However, the biggest reason these didn't make the cut is mainly due to this line right here. Lance specifically states that the goal here is to feint these Pokemon, and feels bad about doing so. Now you can catch them, but the game kind of makes it seem that feinting them was the objective. They are mandatory encounters, so they do work. It was mainly that line from Lance that pushed them down the list. The last option that fit the criteria that Red set up previously is an interesting one, and that's the Odd Egg. You get this from the daycare man right outside Goldenrod City. There's a couple reasons why I opted out on this, one being that it feels kinda like double dipping. We already have Togetic representing the introduction of both baby Pokemon and breeding, but the main reason I didn't go for one of the baby Pokemon you can potentially hatch is, well, mainly that. There's about 7 different Pokemon you could potentially get, Tairo being one of them, along with Magby, Elekid, Smoochum, Pichu, Igglypuff, and Wigglytuff. So while it's perfectly reasonable to add one of them to the final team, just the wide amount of possible Pokemon made it miss the cut. So those were the Pokemon that missed the cut, but all have an argument of being on his team, some more than others. With that, I hope you guys found the video entertaining. Let me know what you guys would come up with as this potential team and why in the comments. I'd love to read through them. Making videos was something I've always wanted to do and just finally went for it. This was kind of to see if this was something I'd actually like to do, and overall I had an absolute blast making this. Looking at it now, I definitely could have probably clarified certain points and elaborated on others more, but overall I'm very happy with how this video turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed. The next video is already in the works, so subscribe, hit the bell, like the video, share it around and all that good stuff. It means a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.